Welcome, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Happy-
Welcome to an Octerrorfest bonusode.
A bonusode. Yay. You've been waiting. You've been demanding. You've been sending very aggressive letters.
Yeah, I mean, enough already. I don't understand why you can't just wait.
I am very
Be
fragile.
patient. We've been working on content.
So much content. And speaking of so much content, here's some content.
Yeah.
Happy-
This is going to be our creature feature.
Spooky season. For this bonusode, yeah, exactly. You and I decided we would go back to the OG well and pick out a classic monster.
Yeah, we're going to talk about our favorite classic monster.
Classic monster.
Probably like Universal.
Yeah,
right?
that would be the
monster.
archetypes. You
Yeah.
know, if we're sticking in the world of film, the classic monsters were established between like the 1920s and the 1940s.
Yeah. Although my classic monster was created well before then.
Well, yeah, but in terms of like their filmic, iconic representations.
Yes, filmatic. So we thought we'd give you a bonusode about just a little breakdown of a few of our favorite monsters in a couple of different iterations.
Yeah, each of us chose one. And these being classic monsters and all, there are several different iterations, variations, takes on these monsters. And we'll kind of go through a little bit of that.
Yeah. Why don't you start?
I shall, with the monster that goes first. That's mine. No, mine is, I went with what I consider to be, in terms of presentation, perhaps not one of the more visually frightening monsters, but in terms of how they usually end up being, one of the scarier and more disturbing classic monsters. And I'm going with the Invisible Man.
Oh, wow. You can't even see him coming.
No, and that is largely the issue here. Now, the Invisible Man was created by father of science fiction H.G. Wells in his 1897 novel titled The Invisible Man. Now, please, first-year English students, do not get this mixed up with Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man.
Which is
Very different.
But
very different.
Yes.
And one has the in front of it and the other one doesn't.
Yeah.
So anyway, The Invisible Man was about Dr. Griffin, who develops technology that refracts light around him. So he doesn't actually turn his body invisible. He just makes it so that you can't see him.
yeah.
And unfortunately, like so many of these tales, it's irreversible. And the ability to never be seen again makes an already sort of on the edge person go nuts. And that is kind of where I wanted to take this, is that there are a couple of different kinds of Invisible Man characters. The most common and popular one is being somebody who, before they became invisible, was already kind of borderline an asshole. And then being invisible drove them way over the edge. Mm-hmm. So in the classic example, and one of the best, we've got 1933's The Invisible Man, arguably the film that kicked it all off, directed by none other than legendary James Whale, who also directed Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Now, Claude Rains, who you might remember from Casablanca, which not quite a horror movie, but it had Nazis in it. So Claude Rains plays what I'm calling the psycho-narcissistic rapey monster, Dr. Jack Griffin, who turns himself invisible and then becomes an absolute nightmare. He stalks women, especially his girlfriend, and he derails a train, causing like a mass casualty event. This guy is a loony. Now, this began the archetype of the bandage-wearing, goggles, trench coat, fedora-wearing kind of Invisible Man, because he wants to go out in public, but he's invisible, so he's got to like cover his face up with bandages and his hands with bandages. And there's that really cool scene in the 1933 version where he unravels the bandages and they manage to retain their shape, like looking like it's coming off of a hand. And it was very, very well done for 1933, especially. I mean, James Whale was a masterful director, but what really gets me about this version is Claude Rains. he has this maniacal cackle. You never see him until the end when he dies. And he has this like kind of moment of, oh, what have I done? Where he says, I meddled in things that man must leave alone. And, like, no fucking shit you did.
Yeah.
But, and then he dies, and kind of like the Wolfman, he becomes visible right as he dies. So it's really the only time you see Claude Rains, who was like a very famous and handsome actor. So pretty cool on this guy to like play this role where it's basically just his voice. Now, moving through the time, but sticking with the villain, we come to 2000's The Hollow Man, directed by.
One.
Well,
it's a good one for nostalgia purposes.
Sure. I saw this
with
in the
Dr.
theater.
Giggles, right?
No, it's got Kevin Bacon.
Oh yeah,
and
right.
Kevin Bacon and Elizabeth Shue. Now, this was a hit and a miss for me. I remember seeing it in the theater. Paul Verhoeven directed it. And the effects are amazing. Specifically, the scene in which Kevin Bacon takes the serum that turns him invisible. He goes through this agonizing transformation process where layer by layer he goes invisible. So you see his musculature, you see his nervous system and his vascular system. It's really cool, and he's like screaming in agony the whole time. He was already kind of a narcissistic and morally ambiguous douchebag. And then this makes him go full crazy. And they really lean into the rapist element of the Invisible Man. Here's the thing.
That's what happens, what he does when he's invisible.
It's the Invisible Man.
Yeah.
Now, when a man is given the power of invisibility, well, it pretty much only goes to a couple of places. Now, the argument I would make is the power itself, the ability itself, whether it's come by accidentally, purposefully, or tragically, it does not lend itself to heroism.
Yeah.
Invisibility is not something most people use to thwart crime. It's kind of like if you gave Superman the ability to control people's minds, would he have been
I
nice
would
guy?
think most people would choose to use invisibility to like steal the Hope Diamond.
Yeah, for theft or for stalking, which it's done a lot, especially in The Hollow Man. Now, this was all culminated, I think, beautifully in the most recent version of The Invisible Man.
With another Elizabeth
Moss. Yes, and we're talking Lee Winnell's version.
We go from a shoe to a moss.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a shoe left outside covered in moss.
Yeah.
So in this version, it's sort of a mix-up between the light refraction technology of the original and like the creepy, like sociopathic villainy.
Yeah, they definitely lean into the like domestic violence of it.
Now, what's most, in my opinion, disturbing about this iteration is that in past versions they sort of gave themselves a little bit of an out by saying the serum or the process of not being able to become visible again made them crazy. But in this movie, it's a suit that you can take off. Mm-hmm. So the choice to become invisible is one to put this suit on and activate it. And when you don't want to be invisible anymore, you take it off. So in this movie, the Invisible Man in question is a super creepy, like Elon Musk-esque woman-hating billionaire techno guy played by Oliver Jackson Cohen from Hill House.
Yeah.
And a bunch of other stuff. Now, he's very manipulative, and this suit, again, it's purposeful to put on and become a villain in the suit and then take it off. So he fakes his death. He's
still a villain when he takes the suit.
Oh
off.
Yeah, no. This guy's a monster anyway. But the suit it's already giving a villain a super suit. But I find that fascinating. And then, there's a great twist, and Elizabeth Moss really does reclaim her agency after being gaslit into oblivion by this Invisible Man.
Yeah, there is a scene in the restaurant.
It's awesome. Amazing.
Horrific.
Yeah, it's one of the best interpretations, especially since the original one. And
it is like women not being believed, and also what do you do in an abusive relationship?
Exactly. And this 2020 version has great effects. Lee Winnell is this year coming out with a new version of The Wolfman. I mean, he's becoming the only like reliable custodian of these classic monster IPs. He's between The Invisible Man and Christopher Abbott is the new Wolfman. It looks really, really good.
Okay.
Julia
I like
Garner's
him.
in it. Yeah. So it's supposed to be violent and bloody and tragic, which is what a good Wolfman movie should be. So anyway, that brings me to my final and most, a kind of out of left field Invisible Man. It was only really done once that I can see, and that's the tragic Invisible Man. Now, this is most well exemplified in what is a flawed movie, a complex movie. It's 1992's Memoirs of an Invisible Man, directed by John Carpenter.
Oh, yeah.
Not one of his favorites. He will be honest about it. It's now this one stars Chevy Chase, who he's not a scientist. He just is in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he's in an accident that turns him invisible. And this movie is a mixed bag. And in the end, I would argue it's not quite successful. However, what it does offer is a semi-heroic invisible man who didn't ask for this, doesn't want it, and he's one of the only that I can think of that isn't like a rapey piece of shit. He's actually, it's quite tragic. He just wants to have a normal life. He's pursued relentlessly by Sam Neill, who's like, trying to catch him and kill him or bring him in for, dissection or whatever. And, it is an aspect of, well, what if you didn't ask for this? What if you didn't seek it out and it was thrust upon you and really all you wanted was to marry your fiance and have like a normal life? Mm-hmm. And there isn't a scene where he has to put on makeup to go out in the restaurant, and some of it's played for the laughs, but it does mimic the life of people who suffer from, disfigurement or deformities or, scarring, where they go out and they are sometimes invisible in their personal lives and then all too visible when they don't want to be.
Right.
So it did have moments. But if you're only going to pick a couple, definitely 1933's Invisible Man from James Whale and 2020's Invisible Man from Lee Whannell. They're great companion pieces. And I do think the Invisible Man, the whole concept and the nature of his powers lend themselves better to a sort of psychopathic genius level villain, the mad scientist, the one who is calculating, cold, and maybe views people not like people, and that element of invisibility, the fear of not being able to find what is stalking you, not being able to convince people that these things happening are not your fault. Mm-hmm. It's terrible. It's isolating. And then at the very end, they come for you.
Right. Amazing. Well, be sure to see some of those.
Yeah, put on your They Live glasses, everybody.
What a great movie. So what I'm going to the monster I'm going to talk about is actually the monster. The creature, the fiend, the demon, the wretch, never named. Most people call this monster Frankenstein, but I'm not going to get into a whole debate with everybody about calling the monster Frankenstein, because the monster isn't Frankenstein.
Was he named as Adam at one point?
Yeah.
In the book, right? I think he's referred to as Adam.
I don't think so. I think maybe in the maybe in some letters
in
the book.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm talking about Frankenstein's monster. I'm going to first talk about the source material as one of my favorite iterations of this monster in the novel Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley.
And I do know I said earlier that H.G. Wells was the father of science fiction, but Mary Shelley
she's
is the
mother of horror.
And predates him by quite a while.
This was
about
written
a century.
in 1818. And it was born out of a ghost story contest between she and her husband, Percy Shelley, and Lord Byron. And they decided to, they were away for the weekend, and they decided to write their scariest version of a ghost story. And this is where this was born.
Yeah.
She won.
She did. No, she won to the extent that first off, P.B. Shelley and Lord Byron are no slouches,
No.
but she won to the extent that these two were like completely flabbergasted.
Yeah.
It's a really, actually look up the story behind this because
It's pretty great.
it was also
this is
like
what they
a
should make a movie about.
real hedonistic weekend
Yeah.
with buckets of opium.
So in the beginning of this novel, we meet Robert Walton, who's a captain explorer in the Arctic, and he's writing letters to his sister and sharing all of the experiences. It's part epistolary novel, part narration, and he's telling the story of this monster. He meets a stranger who we now, like, later come to know as Victor Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein. And Dr. Frankenstein reveals this crazy tale of creation and the consequences of his creation. So we learn this sort of like secondhand. And basically what happens is Frankenstein creates this thing with body parts of corpses, and he escapes and he starts to kill people. He kills his friend, his very good friend. He kills the woman he is intended to marry, Elizabeth. And so it's very sad. Victor Frankenstein is really like heartbroken, and although he doesn't stop doing sort of these experiments while he knows things are going awry, ultimately, and how the novel starts out with the explorer meeting Victor Frankenstein, he is really trying to unburden himself before he is ultimately, killed. And the monster sort of is left alone in the Arctic to mourn the loss of his creator, and eventually dies himself.
I don't think it's appreciated that the novel has one of the OG like boss fights right at the beginning.
Yeah.
It opens with something that not a lot of the movies explore, of, Victor Frankenstein and his creation like fighting to the death in the snowy Arctic while these explorers are like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah, and like they don't really quite understand. And it's sort of a realization of this horror and the terrible consequences of this creation. And also the monster, although not really brilliant, does know what, like, his basically, like, he has to kill. Like, that's really what he's designed for. So that is the OG source material and one of my favorites. Another favorite is probably the original film, 1931 Frankenstein, starring Boris Karloff as the monster.
By James Whale.
Right, directed by James Whale, and Colin Clive is Henry Frankenstein. So they, did a little change up here. Not
bit.
Victor.
Nope.
It's Henry.
Hank Frank.
And this is based on a stage adaptation of Mary Shelley's novel. Karloff had a very, had a flat head with protruding neck bolts. So this is really where the universal vision of the monster came to be.
The Spirit Halloween version.
Yeah, one of the most recognizable characters. So how this sort of tale takes place is at a castle in Bavaria. Dr. Henry Frankenstein and his hunchback assistant Fritz put together a human body out of parts stolen from corpses, and they prepare to give it life through electricity. His fiance and his friend try to stop him, but Dr. Frankenstein continues to go on, and the brain that Fritz has acquired, the hunchback Fritz, he gets the brain that was the brain of a criminal.
It was labeled Abby someone. So
that's how it explains the monster's volatility. The creature kills Fritz. Thanks for the brain. I'll take it from here. And kills Dr. Frankenstein's best friend, escapes from the castle, befriends a young girl, only to drown her in a lake. A very famous.
Oh, yeah.
exchange and experience, and it very tragic and
Should
sudden.
Should be noted from a filmic from a history of cinema. This was came out right before the Hays Code, which is how they were able to show a little girl being murdered on screen.
Yeah.
Which is not something that was allowed for decades after.
To conclude, the mob, the town community mob, chase and trap the monster and burn him alive, like burn him to death.
Oh, yeah.
At least they think.
Well, no, he comes back for 2 more movies.
Yeah.
Poor Maria.
So, I know.
All she wanted was to give a flower to a giant monster.
I know. She was just such a sweet innocent.
Yeah.
But that shows like the brain of this corpse, you know, still having criminality to it.
Yes.
My last is Young Frankenstein.
I'm so happy.
In the year of my birth, 1974.
Whoa.
And the premise of the film was really satire and parody. And it was directly to parody the movie I just mentioned, the original Frankenstein. Also, some other interpretations of Mary Shelley's novel, starring Gene Wilder as Dr. Frankenstein. And
Excuse me? It's Dr. Frankenstein.
yeah, and directed by Mel Brooks. Actually, Gene Wilder said he would only do this movie if Mel Brooks agreed not to appear, because he thought that he would pull attention away from his performance as Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And so he agreed to do that.
Wow.
He plays Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, a medical lecturer who is engaged to Elizabeth, played by Madeline Kahn of Clue fame and other movies. But we love Madeline Kahn. She's
queen.
brilliant.
Queen. Blazing Saddles.
He inherits his grandfather's estate in Transylvania. You see the ridiculousness of it. It's all leaning into the satire. And he wants to distance himself because his grandfather is Victor Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So he's like, I don't want to be in this business. I'm going to do my own thing. So when they go to this estate, he meets Igor, played by Marty Feldman.
Igor.
Who's his hunchback servant, and Inga, played by Terry Garr, who is
Terry Garr is so hilarious in this movie,
so
but
funny.
It's also fun to see her. She's like very young.
Yeah.
She's like a kid.
She
almost.
plays like the beautiful assistant, and she discovers the lab. Or they discover the lab, and they decide to, you know what? We're not going to distance ourselves. We're going to do reanimation. And so Frederick uses an abnormal brain, mistakenly, allegedly, to bring the monster to life during a storm, and he can't control it. Peter Boyle brilliantly plays this monster. Universal held the copyright to the neck bolts, so this is like where the Universal monster trope and like sort of ownership comes in. So they couldn't do the neck bolts. So there's a zip in his neck, like a zip.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how they dealt with it. The monster escapes, chaos ensues. Frederick ultimately is very theatrical, but he can't really explain it to the townspeople.
No, he's a mess.
Yeah, people don't.
The townspeople are like peasants.
Yeah.
And he's a scientist.
And he's like, everything he tries just goes terribly awry.
He's also being pursued by Kenneth Mars playing a police inspector in one of the funniest roles of any movie, anytime, not to mention Cloris Leachman as Frau
yeah, I was
Blucher,
going to say that. We can't forget Cloris Leachman as
who, in a
Frau
lifetime
Blucher.
of gold, this was maybe some of her best.
Yeah, I mean, she's amazing.
Blucher.
In the end, though, Frederick marries Inga, and the monster is intelligent and forms a bond with Elizabeth, and they celebrate with a musical ending.
Of course, Mel Brooks.
And, you know, Mel Brooks wanted to film this in black and white to really evoke all of the earlier films while satirizing it to the highest degree. So I would say, depending on your real interest in Frankenstein's monster, like what is your interest? Do you want to know how this story really came to be what it is now and all the iterations of it? Read the novel. Do you just want to have the best time of your life? Watch Young Frankenstein.
You know, that's the power of the story. It's been around for a few centuries, but it's also so ingrained in the culture that you can jump right into Young Frankenstein, a movie that satirizes another movie without having seen the original and completely get something from it. Also,
You'll totally get it.
Don't be put off. This movie is one of the funniest movies ever made. It has been around since the 70s and has not lost a single step.
Yeah. It's amazing, great performances,
and just hilariously silly.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a watch, regardless of if you've seen it before.
Boyfriend,
I know, but this is a great movie for people who don't like horror.
Yeah, exactly.
And to have on even in the background of a party,
it's the best. And like it's a good litmus test. Like I don't think I've ever met anyone that doesn't like this movie because if I did, I'd be worried about them.
So that was my Universal Monster Mash.
Can I add one quick Frankenstein interpretation to yours?
I guess.
Tom Noonan as the monster in The Monster Squad, where he played just like a really simple... He was the only good guy out of all the monsters that escaped. He helped the kids banish them all to the hell dimension, even though it meant he would have to go too, and they made friends with him. And Tom Noonan's performance without dialogue, just his face and his body language, and you know, it's a kids movie, it's a lot of fun, but he's beautiful in it. And I'll never forget at the end just crying my eyes out because of his beautiful performance.
We also have Frankenweenie.
Of course, Frankenweenie and Frankenhooker.
Frankfurter, actually from Rocky Horror Picture Show.
We've got Frankenhooker, obviously. Just, you know, and then all of the cool interpretations over the years, like the Angry Black Girl and Her Monster and Birth, Rebirth.
It's been done.
Stuff. Yeah.
And still, I know it's very synonymous to call the monster Frankenstein, but just, you know, be careful out there.
Don't do it around us.
You know, don't do it around Richard, especially.
Unless you like being in a cellar.
It is the monster. Also, Phil Hartman's.
Yes.
On Saturday Night Live.
Absolutely.
Anytime he plays the monster.
Yeah.
Also brilliant.
Yep. Well, that was a bonusode. Happy almost Halloween. It's coming. It's happening.
Happy Octerrorfest.
Happy October. Every day of October is a happy day.
Yeah. And just keep biting those heads off.
Absolutely. Bye.